Welcome to Off the Grid, a podcast for small business owners who want to leave social media without losing all their clients.
Let's go off the grid. Okay. Let's go off the grid. Okay. I know that you really want to put your phone away. Yeah. Let's go off the grid.
Hello and welcome back to Off the Grid, a podcast about launching, growing, and running a creative small business without social media. I'm your host, Amelia Freeby. I am the founder of Softer Sounds Podcast Studio. And here on this show, I am your guide, your biz BFF, your fellow traveler on this journey of finding ways to support ourselves without getting trapped by the algorithms, preferably. I am also the creator of the free Leaving Social Media Toolkit. So if you don't have that already, I hope you will head to the show notes, grab the link. It is completely free and includes the 3 tools that I used to leave social media and start my business without it. You can get all those goods at offthegrid.fun/toolkit. And if you've already got it, good for you, my friend. Today we are here for another episode of season 6 of Off the Grid. I feel like at this point in season 6, honestly, at this point in this year, it is not news to any of us that 2025 has been tough. These are hard times. They are hard times personally. They are hard times politically. I have been talking about how hard the times are in this podcast. We're probably all tired of saying it, but it doesn't cease to be true. So here we are. And I don't know about you, but just the reality of these hard times have been making it really hard for me to feel motivated and connected to my work. And I am generally a very self-motivated, super excitable person. I love what I do. I started my own business so I could be excited to get up and go to work in the mornings. But this year, I have been asking myself questions like, does my business matter in the face of all of this? And how on earth am I supposed to send a marketing email when insert horrible thing here just happened? And honestly, even deeper questions like, how can I be creative or energized or inspired when I feel awful and everything feels awful? So, not to be a bummer, but if you can relate to any of these questions, then today's episode is for you, dear listener. I'm so glad you tuned in. I hope you will cozy on up with your AirPods and keep listening because you are in exactly the right place if you're kind of questioning everything right now. So today I'm joined by the one and only Sarah Arantza Amador of Hawthorne Mountain Tarot. Sarah is an award-winning author, tarotist, and Jungian creativity coach living on the Monterey Bay of Northern California. As a former university professor with a background in literary analysis, nonviolent communication, psychoanalysis, and critical theory and philosophy, Sarah now works with the tarot and other magical modalities to ignite curiosity and explore inter- and intra-personal connection and understanding. Sarah is so wise, and today she's here to talk to us a little bit about tarot and a lot of it about radical imagination in hard times. So, hi, Sarah. Welcome to Off the Grid.
Well, hi, Amelia. Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here. What a wonderful introduction. I'm I'm blushing. Thank you. Gosh, I'm wise. I'm also so silly.
Wisdom makes you silly. It's the perfect balance. So I'm so thrilled to have you. And honestly, I'm really needing this conversation the week that we're recording it. And I feel like we're all needing it the week that it's coming out. So I want to begin with a ginormous but important question. And that question is, what is radical imagination to you?
That is a ginormous question. And before I can take a stab at answering it for myself, I feel like we need to acknowledge its roots in Black liberation movements of the 20th century. This is not a new concept. This is something that was a strategy developed for resistance against white supremacy and capitalism and intersecting systems of oppression over the past 50, 60 years. And so many scholars have written about radical imagination and how it is essential for movements for justice. And I invite everyone to go down different bunny paths, different bunny trails to find what they want to find and and learn what they want to learn. But basically, like, it comes down to this idea that before we can create a more just world, we have to be able to imagine one. And that's a concept that I really take to heart because I feel like in my own life, imagination has played such a huge role in all of the best things in my life. My imagination has had to play a really big part in getting me moving towards these things that I want. If I can't imagine it, if I have the blinders over my eyes, I can't move. And if I can't move, then nothing changes. So when I think of radical imagination for myself, it's about refusing to accept the idea that things either have to be the way that they are or that they have to be determined by actors outside of myself, outside of my sphere, outside of the influence of my peers and colleagues and loved ones. It's about expanding possibilities of what we can create, not just for ourselves, but together as groups, and not just in our art and not just in our work, but just throughout our lives and in our communities generally. So yeah, I think that's where I'm going to leave that for now because I could jump off this answer and just spin all kinds of tales with it. But that's fundamentally it, I think.
Thank you so much for opening this conversation in this way. And I really appreciate how you grounded us in Black liberationist theory and practice. I, as we're recording this, have a poster right behind my computer that I can look at right now of the Angela Davis quote, "Radical simply means grasping things at the root." And I always come back to this, the way that radical work uproots things. And that really feels like the sort of political approach and personal approach that you're bringing and that we've both learned from these thinkers to radical imagination. Like, we really have to dig into the roots of how we even imagine what's possible, and we have to begin imagining different possibilities. And I also like that you brought in this sort of politics of refusal. I love how, I think it's Mariam Kaba who talks about, like, not this is enough. Like, no, we don't have to know exactly what's coming next, but knowing that we don't want this is a political statement. And I think that so much of radical imagination, like the way you're talking about it, it starts there with kind of looking around at our own lives, at the world we live in, and saying, like, not this. It's the first step. And then if we want any sort of answer to, so what else? That's where imagination comes in. And these like dual movements of refusing this, creating what's next. Radical imagination ties them together. And I love that so much.
Mm-hmm. No, I really like the way that you're bringing those two things together, right? It's like that tension, the friction between the not this, and if not this, then what? That's the traction that we need to start imagining and to start creating together. I think that's where things get really exciting, the spark of potential.
I'm wondering if you and I could maybe think of some examples from our own lives. Maybe I'll ask you first, but I'm happy to reflect as well. Like, what are moments where you feel like radical imagination has helped you kind of turn a not this into a what then in your personal life or your business? Does anything come to mind?
Oh, yeah. All kinds of things come to mind, but I can start with how I started my business. Hawthorne Mountain Tarot is a business that I started about 5 years ago. And it started a couple of months before the start of the pandemic. I was working full time. And to be honest, I have to say that, like, I do have a full-time rent job apart from my business. And a lot of the not this came from my personal experience working a 9 to 5 in a large institutional setting where, I did my work in a very particular way. I would get a paycheck. I would use that paycheck to like pay my bills, try to squirrel away a little something, and just do that day in and day out. And when I started playing with the idea of starting my business, first of all, I had never been a person who thought of themselves as having any kind of business acumen or savvy or anything. So, like, for me, business was never, especially as a kid growing up in the 1990s, reading like Adbusters magazine, I just never thought that I'd be in a realm in which I would be working for myself and finding ways to market myself and gosh, all of that. But with this business, it started out so small and so organically in my little community, and it felt like a fun little side project. And because of that, I was able to think like, okay, well, what are all of the things that I wish I could do with my assets? What are the things that I wish I could do with the capital that I have that I don't feel empowered to do now or able to do now? I'm like, oh, well, I want to contribute to this nonprofit organization, or like, I want to contribute to these folks who are doing good work in my community. And I started my business from that point of view. Like, where am I in my little web, in my little community web, my little ecosystem? And what are the things that I can do with my own weird little talents to help support that spider's web that I'm a part of? A way of thinking that I've never considered before. And that's been really powerful for me. That's been my North Star ever since then. Like, where do I fit in the ecosystem that I find myself in?
Oh, I love that you called them your weird little talents. That phrase just really stuck out to me. I think because I like it so much more than the sort of like, what is my calling, right? Like, what is my purpose? I mean, I think purpose work is really important and I've done a lot of it, but sometimes I don't need to like get caught in like trying to discover my capital P purpose. I just need to like have a weird little talent and like contribute in some way. Like, something about that really struck me. I also really love kind of the path into your business that you're charting for us, the way that the not this was not institutions, not being beholden to this one employer for all of the money that you can have or earn, like not that. And then what next is like finding your way into creating a side business from your tarot practice. And I'm really grateful that you're here and that you're sharing that so openly too, because I think, often I talk about my path into self-employment on this podcast, obviously, but I think I had a path that isn't super common. Like I quit a job, I took a 6-month sabbatical, and I started a business that became my full-time income after that. I think that most people actually that I speak to, at least through the show, their business builds slowly over time. It starts as that thing they're doing alongside something else, and it builds and it builds and it builds. And there's a way of telling my story that does work more like that, where I started freelance editing and that built and built. And then eventually there's kind of a point I turned it into a business. But I also wanted to kind of highlight the way you're talking about, like, you have a beautiful business and you have a full-time job. And as I'm always saying, like, self-employment is a spectrum. We can have both, and it's all beautiful. I love all of it.
I was just thinking of something else that the start of the business really allowed me to do was like, once I had that little glimmer of like, oh, now I have capital that I can seed. I can like plant these little seeds around my community. Oh, I can also seed myself in that way. Like one of the major goals that I had when I first started Hawthorne Mountain Tarot was like the very first fiscal goal that I had was I want to make enough to send myself on one writing retreat. Just one, very short, 2-night writing retreat at a B&B in the next county over, just to see what that's like. So just little stepping stones, little breadcrumbs eventually led me to something bigger.
Yeah, I love the smallness of each step, and I appreciate that emphasis. I was thinking for myself, like, what were my sort of radical imagination moments, the not this, what then moments in my own journey. And I'm realizing, like, I talk about them all the time. They're all of the, like, quote unquote breakups that I talk about on this podcast, like breaking up with social media, breaking up with diet culture, breaking up with Google and Amazon. Like, I talk about these things, but I think if I look back at that experience, a breakup makes it sound sort of like this sort of like snap thing that happened. But as anyone who's ever gone through a breakup knows, it is a long process. There's often like many things that are not going so great before you actually get to the breakup moment. And I think that so much of those moments for me really came from just all these like eye-opening, awakening moments before that, where I started to see the systems that were operating on and in my life. I started to notice the places where I felt all that friction in the world because the world was working against me, not with me. Or I saw the places that, so many career paths or my time on social media or, in the past, my like commitment to diet culture and trying to be thin. None of that was working for me. And the more clearly I saw that, that's eventually what led to those breakups. But part of that was I had to be able to see what came after that, right? And sometimes I was able to find that. Like I was really into the body positivity movement on the internet because it helped me see what came beyond. It helped me imagine life beyond diet culture. And the reason Off the Grid exists is to try to help us all imagine life and business beyond social media. I think of this whole podcast as an act of radical imagination. And I love that your business started as an act of radical imagination. I'm wondering, maybe coming a little more into the present day, how do you bring radical imagination into your work and your life now? Because I see when we're talking about these big moments, like starting a business or breaking up with social media, like we've said, it's about the tiny seeds, but like, how do we do it day to day?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And my immediate answer is like, oh, well, you just have to get really silly, Amelia. Duh. um, you just you just have to allow yourself to be silly and whimsical. Which it sounds facetious, but it isn't. That's really how it's really how I do things. I think I just have a really active imagination in which I'm constantly talking to myself and singing silly songs. I think of my business as like, this is a fun enterprise that no one is forcing me to do. I'm having a good time. And when it's challenging, I want to think of those challenges as fun puzzles that I get to work through. And if I need to take a break from a fun challenge, that's okay. I'll step away from it and I'll do something else. And then when I'm feeling a little bit more resourced, I'm feeling a little bit more calm or a little bit more energized, or maybe I've had a snack or a nap, and I'll come back and I'll see about, addressing that challenge again and see if I can like noodle away at disentangling something. Because my work is so connection based, people to people connection based, a lot of my motivation comes from the delight that I get in meeting new people, having conversations, having my eyes open in the same way that you described, right? Like so much of imagination, we have this idea that it's this wellspring that we need to find, or like there's this holy grail, or there's a muse, and the muse only comes down from the clouds every once in a while. And if we're lucky, we get a conversation with the muse. And if we're not lucky, then, we're out of luck and no creativity for us. But for me, so much of creativity and imagination comes from those interactions with others and getting exposed to new ways of thinking, new ways of talking about things, new experiences. So finding ways to continue learning and to continue discovering things, following those those bunny trails. This is my new favorite analogy. Instead of rabbit holes, which sound a little bit scary and claustrophobic, I just like bunny trails because I'm like, oh, I just get to hop after adorable bunny tails, please. Yes. Yeah, metaphorical language, finding ways to make things playful. Those are the ways that I keep my imagination active on a day-to-day.
It's so simple. The part of me wants to like dismiss it and be like, can't be that. Sorry. I need you to have a more grandiose method here for me. But no, that's it. The fact that I'm having that reaction, I think is just speaking to like, I can definitely get super stuck in the rut of my daily routines. And I kind of love this difference between us right now because, you have a job and then your business is like this sort of like fun place you get to go and like meet people and be inspired and nurtured, and you can step back from the challenges, and that's a beautiful. And then I can already feel myself in my head. Like I can feel these voices coming up. They're like, oh, but my business is all the time. And sometimes it's just hard and I don't know how to get away from it. And there's so much pressure on it because it has to make me all this money, or by all this money, I just mean like it has to pay my rent. It has to do these things. And when I start to put that pressure on it, then I can't have fun with it. And I like stop doing all the fun things that I started my business to do. Like I stop pulling my tarot cards. I stop having my dance parties. I stop chatting about random stuff on calls with clients. And I'm like straight to work and down to business. And then it's no fun for anybody. And then I just feel so depleted and so burnout. And I guess we're just having my own Amelia coaching session right now. But what I would like to know from you, I guess, please help me is my first question. But a more general way to ask that question is like, how do you help your clients? Because I know you're also a creativity coach. Like when they're having trouble accessing that fun or like finding it, like what do we do when you're in that point where you're like, or somebody's like, Sarah, there is no fun to be found here. How do you help them out?
Well, just listening to you right now, talking about your business, my first question I want to ask you is like, well, how does this all feel in your body when you first start having these thoughts?
Tight, brown, beige.
The colors of seriousness and hard labor and the tightness. Listening to you, I could feel tightness and constriction in my own chest and in my own throat. And I don't know. I think that my first suggestion would be, how would it feel to get up out of your chair and do some stretching, move your body so that you can get out that tension that's coming up. And then from there, how can we take that even further by asking ourselves, all right, how can I incorporate even little things like 5 minutes of some kind of activity that's going to invite flexibility, that's going to invite openness, that's going to invite feeling some gentleness and some real levity, because that's what's going to keep us going, right? Like the slog will just keep slogging unless we do something to un-slogify ourselves. So like the little chats with your clients, like that helps to keep things lubricated, right? Or the dance parties, that helps keep you loose so that you can carry the weight when you need to carry the weight. But if we don't like, and I will take this metaphor and drive it into the ground, but I really think that starting with our bodies and checking out like, oh yeah, okay, when I have these thoughts, how do I feel? Do I want to feel that way? What are ways that I can counteract this feeling? And how can I incorporate those things on a more regular basis so that I can feel some relief on the day-to-day?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I love this support for unslogifying ourselves. That's just a great word, full of whimsy. I'm very into it. And it's helpful, honestly, just to hear you reflect back some of the things I said, because I think that, I'm at a stage where like I've done this enough that I have the list of things that I know, right? Like the voice message to a friend, the tarot card, the 5-minute dance party. I know these are the things that like unslog me. They unblock me. They help it feel lighter and looser and more fun. But I'll still get into this like tight caught grindy place where like I don't allow myself those things, or they feel even harder to go take 5 minutes to do that than to just like stick with the slog that I have going. And more slogging is rarely the answer in my work, at the very least. And it's just helpful to hear it like reflected back from you. So thank you for our brief foray into Amelia's coaching session. Me bringing up this example from my own business, that to me is like the sort of personal side of like when work is a hard time and we're having trouble accessing our imagination because internally we're feeling really stuck or tight or brown, as I just put it. Like that's one aspect of it. But I think there's something else happening this year that has less to do with like I'm having trouble accessing my imagination or fun personally, and more to do with like when I look out in the world, things are so dire. They are so hard. So much awful shit is happening. Like, how do I imagine otherwise in the face of all of that? So I'm curious, like, what is your support or advice for connecting and reconnecting with our imagination when like the hard times aren't just internal, they're like really external too?
Yeah. Yeah. That's a wonderful question. And I'm right there with you. Like I am not a super woman who's like risen above the problems of the world at all. I'm deeply entrenched in it, just like everyone else. We're all in it together, right? And I've really been struggling with this the past couple of months, but I've noticed that I feel better and I feel more hopeful the more that I connect with my loved ones and the more that I connect with like-minded folks who can, give me a little bit of wind underneath my wings. I really find that so valuable. For example, I'm part of this nonviolent communication women's group. We meet once a month. I show up with like squiggle marks and like tornado swirls over my head, just like coming in after a long day of work, being like, I can't believe this or that, the other thing, or like, what am I going to share today? And I leave feeling so much better because I was able to actually get out of my own head. Once I'm able to talk about my stuff and get a little bit of empathy from the group, I get to just focus on other people and other people's stuff and focus on supporting them. And that really helps me shift my perspective. It gets me out of that pinhole perspective that I often get when things feel really urgent and really like dangerous. My perspective just kind of like zeroes in on what's directly in front of me and I can't see anything else. But if I'm able to shake out of that, either by taking a walk with a friend, going to the women's group, getting out into nature and spending just 5 minutes listening to birds, watching a sunset. A couple of weeks ago, I had this realization. I was like, okay, things are pretty scary right now. Things are pretty scary. And yet the sun continues to rise. The moon continues to come out every night. And then the sun sets and then it rises again. Like there are some things that are bigger than these really big, real threats that I can rely on to give me just a little bit of a boost of energy. And that's the other thing, is that I have to be able to protect myself and my energy and help my people protect their own energy too, right? Like strong, loving, healthy boundaries are more needed now than ever before. I need to be able to step away from the news cycle. And this is where no longer being on social media that often really helps.
Yeah.
Getting away from the news cycle or consuming it in ways that I know I can regulate and I can control better so that I can stay engaged, I can stay informed, but I can also pull back and do those things that I know are going to nurture me, that are going to replenish my energy. That's been really important too. So I used to be the kind of person who would listen to NPR every morning as I started my day. I can't do that anymore. The world is a trash fire. I can do it once a week. And then I focus on, all right, what's going on right in my community? Let's focus on that for a couple of days before we go back to listening to NPR.
Yeah, what's striking me as you're sharing all of that is that it's so much about perspective and zooming in and out and being really thoughtful with kind of the lens that you're bringing to your own life or to the world. Like, are we at a personal level right now? Are we at a local level? Are we at a national level? Are we at an interplanetary level? Like, where are we at and how are we approaching this moment or approaching this situation? And, I think one of the beauties of being human is that we have that degree of perspective. We can zoom all the way in and out in those ways, but definitely social media has like a particular way of manipulating our ability to zoom in and out and like taking our attention in different places. The other thing though that really struck me was your example you started with of the nonviolent communication group. And I was just thinking about like the power of transmuting our feelings through conversation and through community. And of course, that has to be done consensually, right? Like the invitation is not to like show up in a room and spew all your stuff at everyone. Like, yikes. But in a setting where you've all agreed to like be there and support each other, or even less formally in a friendship where you've agreed to like show up for each other and listen to the messages and hop on the phone, like I think that connecting with other people, that's really the first step to me is like, if I'm feeling really disconnected, really shut down, really tight, really beige, since I keep saying that, my instinct is often to self-isolate. But what's actually needed is connection with other people.
Yeah, that's right. Think about how so many of us deal with stress and deal with tension and fear by clamming up and like digging down. I certainly do that. I have done that. I'm working on it. I'm trying not to do that as often anymore. And as you were talking, I was just thinking about brown and beige. These like muddied colors. It's like our own tension and our own stress. It muddies all of our perspective, right? It kind of like compounds and flattens our ability to have perspective. And when we're able to communicate, when we're able to have a conversation with someone who really hears us and who's really able to engage with us in a conversation about something, even if like they don't need to have a solution. Most of the time I don't need solutions. I just need some empathy. I'm able to move all of that feeling into something else, right? It doesn't sit and compound and flatten. It is able to like get moving and transform itself. I loved what you said about transmutation. That's what we do in groups. That's what we do in relationships, is really alchemize, right? We take disparate elements, we take disparate experiences, and when we bring them together, we're able to conjure up new things. If that isn't radical imagination, I don't know what is. That's perfect.
Hi friends, Amelia here with a message from this week's sponsor. Do you ever feel stuck? Like you're caught in a loop of self-doubt and not sure how to move forward with your ideas? Or if you even should? We all carry stories that whisper we're not enough, that our ideas don't matter, or that taking the next step is too risky. But here's the thing. Confidence doesn't just appear on its own. It's something you build step by step through small actions. The only way to break the self-doubt loop is to move through it. That's why Pascal, past podcast guest and creativity guide at Dear Creative Mind, created the Creative Confidence Toolkit, a free resource designed to be a gentle companion as you dissolve the stories keeping you stuck. It helps you understand what stands between you and your creative power and offers an anchoring place to return to as you begin stretching your comfort zone. Inside, you'll find gentle guidance to reconnect with your creative self, a meditation to identify limiting beliefs, journaling prompts to rewrite the stories that don't serve you, and a creative practice to help you trust yourself again. Download the Creative Confidence Toolkit for free at dearcreativemind.com/resources. So much of entrepreneurship, as it's connected to like the quote unquote American dream, as that's connected to capital C capitalism, is all about the individual, right? It's like I start my business so I can become wealthy, so I can make the money. And there's this real deterrent to collaboration within, frankly, how businesses are structured. Like partnerships are more complicated to run than individual businesses. I'm dealing with this right now, trying to pay taxes for things that have been split across multiple people or multiple businesses. Like the literal systems are set up to kind of silo us into being individuals and being alone. And even the word solopreneurship is like about being solo. But in the face of all of that, I'm realizing like more than ever this year, I feel motivated by doing things with other people. In a way that maybe in the past I would have like just hosted a workshop myself, or just like even on this podcast, done a bunch of solo episodes. Right now, things are only happening in my life if they're happening with others. Like it's why I did a co-working group this spring, because I couldn't get to work without other people showing up so we could do it together. But it's also why like I'm just really interested in these more like collaborative and co-creative efforts on every level of business. I'm curious if there are ways that like collaboration or community are coming up in your work and in your business this year that feel exciting and interesting to you and connected to these themes of like radical imagination.
Absolutely. I feel like that kind of collaborative community work has been at the heart of what I do with Hawthorne Mountain Terrace since the very beginning. I love to do and hope to be able to continue doing this soon. There's a lovely bookshop in my area called Olivia and Daisy Books. And I've led one tarot workshop there. And I'm looking forward to doing another one. We keep putting it off because the world is nuts and everything's super busy. But finding ways to actually get together in a little workshop classroom setting there, getting to know my fellow magical, whimsical solopreneurs in my area and meeting up with them. I'm one colleague of mine who I love. They started up a nature church this year, and every couple of Sundays we get together and we go on a hike. It's great. People bring snacks. We bring snacks, we bring water bottles, and we take a nice leisurely walk together on a Sunday morning. Finding time to connect with folks and just see what bubbles up when we play together, and it really feels like play. That's been giving me lots of really interesting ideas of, new things that I want to do and folks who I want to do it with. Who am I going to reach out and say hey, I would love to do XYZ thing. I know that you are really interested in dream work. I know a little bit about dream work, but I want to learn more from you. Do you want to co-lead a workshop with me on dream work in my area? That's been the most exciting and will continue to be, I think, definitely will continue to be a really big aspect of the work that I do, collaborating with others and doing community events and stuff like that.
Yeah, and it's so nourishing for our creative spirit, for our imagination, but also what's good for our community is good for our business. These aren't separate things. It's not like you go do your community stuff and you go do your business stuff. I think in ecosystem models of business, at the very least, what's good for our community also benefits our business. And who exactly the community is there may be different for different people and different businesses. And maybe your local community, it may be your virtual community, it may be your client community, whatever it might be. But still, obviously at Off the Grid, we're all about a community and relationship centered approach to business. And I think that even amidst that, sometimes it can really feel okay, I run my business and then I have my community service stuff that I do, right? And I think of it separately. But I think in the most satisfying businesses, the ones that feel like they really nourish all parts of us as creators and business owners, those things are intimately intertwined. It's not that I have a business and I do community service. It's not that I even calling myself in here. It's not that I make my money and then I donate my 1% to these organizations I've never heard of until I donate to them. Even in my own practice of redistribution, the more I've reintegrated that money into okay, well now it's actually going to an organization where I know all the people who run it. It's all in my community. It's all happening. It's been integrated. And that is the word that keeps coming up is nutritive, full of nutrients for the soil and the community around me. And that I guess is again what I'm rooting back into. It's we uprooted it all with the radical part, but now we can root back in through our imagination and how we reconnect with other people through our lives and our businesses.
I love this metaphor that we're building together, this gardening, this gardening metaphor, because it's so true. What do you do with a plant that's unhappy? You pull it up out of the pot, you get some water into the roots, you clean them off, you speak lovingly to it, and you say, "You're so beautiful. I'm so sorry that you haven't been feeling well. Let me repot you and give you some nice nutrients in the soil. Let's aerate the soil. Let's sing songs to you while you drink water." I want all of that for all of us. We all deserve that. And you're right that it's so true that the more that we are able to think of ourselves as part of a larger web in which we're circulating resources, we're circulating knowledge, we're sharing with one another, that's feeding all of us. And that's what's helping us to un-slogify is that nutrition, that nutritive, I don't know, are they it's fertilizer. It's really good plant fertilizer. So Yeah, I think that's super important for all of us to really consider and think about like, oh, okay, how am I helping get myself the nutrients that I need and helping others get the nutrients that they need? Like I'm part of a bigger electrical board here. I'm not just a single, I don't know, not just a single person floating out in the middle of the ether. I I am grounded in existence and that existence moves well beyond me. So let's really think carefully and thoughtfully about how we wish to engage in that system. I love that.
And this is where, like, I think radical imagination is also at the root of all successful businesses to some degree, like, because businesses solve problems, successful ones, like they solve a problem. And we need radical imagination to solve problems. And I think that radical imagination can become this tool we have for, as we've talked through in this episode, like kind of opening our eyes to the problems around us and opening our eyes beyond the like existing solutions presented to us, right? Like, and also, I love what you brought in, Sarah. Like, it can be silly, it can be fun, it can be whimsical. We can do things that are incredibly important and they can still feel good. I think it's all in this like both and ness that always comes up for me from the work of those same like Black liberationist thinkers that brought us all of this work on radical imagination, right? So, we get to be creative problem solvers as business owners. We get to be radical imaginers. What is the Walt Disney thing?
Oh, the Imagineers.
Imagineers, yeah. We get to be radical Imagineers. And our businesses get to be our like Disney World environments that we create where we can do some of that work. That's what I try to remind myself of when I really need to like un-slogify myself is like, I did not start this business just to like replicate all the working conditions I hated of every other thing that I ever did. And if I have found myself there, which let's be honest, I do at least like once a quarter, I'm like back in the grind and I'm like, why have I worked a 10-hour day? What is happening here? Like, this is not what I was trying to do. But when I do, it's that the fun, the levity, the imagination, and the community connection. Because sometimes I need a 5-minute dance break. And sometimes I actually need to go like do 3 hours of deep work on a project that supports people who aren't me. And that unslogifies me just as well as my like 5 minutes of self-care unslogifies me. Like both and yet again.
Absolutely. There are so many different ways that we can tap into those values that are personal to us and that we want to guide the work that we do and the way that we show up in the world, right? Like there isn't one strategy that's the end all be all of strategies. That's the beauty of living in a diverse world is that we're exposed to all of these different possibilities, all of these different strategies. Strategies can also be adapted. They evolve over time. Like that's the beauty of life. Everything's morphing and changing and responding to and reacting to. So that's the other thing that I remind myself of is that there's no monolithic endpoint that we're trying to get to because there's always going to be change. But if we keep trying to bend towards the kinds of change that we want, bending towards those values that are really important to us and that really nurture us, connection, transparency. I don't know. I mean, do a web search and you'll find like lists, like nonviolent communication lists of like hundreds of different kinds of values. We don't have to limit ourselves. We get to pick and choose from those values, and those values will also change over time. That's the most exciting thing about radical imagination, or just like imagination generally, is that like once you get excited about something and once you find yourself leaning into the possibility of something, suddenly you have this energy that you didn't realize that you had. Suddenly you want to be able to do XYZ things. It provides enthusiasm. It provides motivation. That energy is what we need to, again, unslogify.
This is all such a beautiful reminder. And I'm really appreciating how even in this conversation, we're moving through, like zooming in and out on all these levels of like our personal lives, our businesses, the broader community efforts. And Everything you were just saying really reminds me as well of like, I think there's just been this real energy in the online business space of like a desire to build an online business that provides passive income. So you can just set it up and it will make all your money forever and you never have to touch it again. You can just like exit, but the business will run and make money for you. And first of all, like that doesn't work. It does, I guess, for some people who have a very different value system than me, but also I don't think it's working even for them anymore. Like the ones who are digital nomads and setting up their business operations in different countries where the exchange rate is wonderful for the sort of like US creator and who is selling these sort of like frivolous, all digital product sort of based businesses that are promoted by Facebook ads, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Like that was like a dream. We saw it reemerge with like the rise of the faceless accounts and the sort of, I think it's like master resale right stuff that was happening last year in 2024. Like, I think we're really caught in this moment, that like grindy moment at the stage we're at in like capitalism and online business and inflation and all of this, where like the idea of just being able to like set it and forget it, your whole income forever, is so appealing, right? It's kind of like creating your own little trust fund through your passive income business for yourself. Like, I'm not here to critique the desire for that. But what I've had to come to is like, that goes against everything I believe about how creative life force and business works. And it's gets to exactly what you were just saying, though. It's all about like embracing the change. It's always going to change. And I meet with a lot of people who are like looking at their businesses being like, I am too exhausted. Why can't it just work the way it used to work? And part of what we have to do is like find it within us, like return to the radical imagination to be like, it's always going to be changing. Like I have to love what I do enough to keep wanting to change with it. And that's not to glorify also like another problematic idea of like the passion career or whatever. Like, but it's more to say like, the reason I think radical imagination belongs on a creative business podcast is because I think this is the type of thing that motivates the entire enterprise of being a creative person in business, is like how we tend to this.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think of my creativity as an engine, or again, with my metaphorical language, or like some kind of apparatus that needs to be fed, or like a body. A body needs to be fed. A body needs nutrients. It needs water. It needs food. It needs air. If it doesn't have those things, it's going to go kaput. I don't want my business to go kaput. I need to feed things into it. It's not brain in a jar. There's like a whole body associated with that thing, and it needs to be exercised. It needs to be inspired. It needs stuff so that it can produce an output, or, it needs to be able to generate its own energy so that it can do the things that you want it to do, or the things that you didn't even realize that it was going to do, but could be a pleasant surprise. I don't know.
It's like it needs input, it has output, and, its metabolism, its equations are always changing, right? It's not like one in, one out. Some days it's 100 in, 10,000 out, and some days it's like -1 in, 2 out, and some days it's like 1,000 in, 0 out, right? Like, I think that was something else that was a big shift for me in running my business, is I was so steeped in meritocracy that I was like, well, whatever I put in, I should get out from this. And running a creative business, letting myself be like a deeply creative person in my business also taught me that is not a direct equation. This is not simple math of 1 in, 1 out here, or 1 in, 10 out here. Like it's always shifting. And what I get to do, what I wanted to say was what I have to do is change with it. But what I get to do is change with it. And I think it's like shifting, like that perspective is so important and also really hard. Like my heart really goes out to all the people who land on this podcast and they're like, I spent all the money on the 10-step plans. I put everything in place and like it didn't get the results that I was promised or that I wanted. Like I hear you. There's so many people out there selling that. And we, Sarah and I, are here to say like, it's not how it works. Or we don't think that's how it works. I don't think that's how like energy works more generally. I don't think that's how life works more generally. And I don't think that's how business works more generally.
Just listening to you right now, I'm reminded that there are so many nuances to like the input output only works with, I can't say only, that's not true. Input output works with Excel spreadsheets. And I am more complicated than an Excel spreadsheet. I am more complicated than a formula used in an Excel spreadsheet. There is more nuance, there is more variability, there are conditions and variables that are beyond my control. And as I discover those things and identify those things, like I have the opportunity to decide whether or not it's something I choose to engage with. Like, okay, am I going to deal with this? Am I not going to deal with it? Am I going to try to dance with it a little bit? What if I tweak this? What if I tweak that? Like, there's a business it's kind of like its own little living organism that is part of me. Like I have some influence there. I have a lot of influence there, but I'm not the only one with influence in my business. And my clients are also not the only ones with influence in my business. And I think that the more that I lean into that, the more I'm able to see the bigger landscape, right? Like I get a bigger perspective of like, oh, I see what's happening here is that we're connected to XYZ things. Got it. Now what do I want to do with that information?
Yes, I love this so much. I feel like that input-output piece, you are not a spreadsheet. We're more complex than a spreadsheet. It's also so like such an industrial factory floor kind of orientation to work. And so it's like if I started my business to let go of that sort of like mechanistic relationship to labor, I also have to let go of that input-output direct correlation that was only ever possible when we treated ourselves like machines or were oppressed into industrial conditions that forced us to be machines. And I say that knowing very well that there are still people who live under those conditions and work under those conditions, including very close to where I live. And we have a Smithfield processing plant here that people died at during the pandemic. And those conditions are still very real. And like, what a gift and a privilege that I've been able to change my life so that I'm not living under those conditions. And also, it means that some of the expectations I have for what's possible or how something will work, like they have to shift too. They get to shift too. And it's all a part of that ecosystem, which I was also thinking of when you use the phrase ecosystem, like when we're running a business. I mean, I deeply believe that businesses are spiritual entities. If folks are interested in that, you can listen to our episode from last fall. There was a Halloween episode on 3 magical rituals, and 2 of them were about communing with your business spirit. And I think a big piece of that is like your business is an entity that has an ecosystem. It connects with so much more than you do as an individual. And what I love about that is like my business ecosystem is so expansive in a way that when I worked a job, it never was. Like with my job, it was like me and my employer and my coworkers. Like that was the whole ecosystem, because most jobs are pretty like inward facing to a company, or like you don't really have a lot of sovereignty or empowerment to do things differently. Like maybe you are customer facing, but what I love about my business is how much it's expanded that ecosystem for me and how liberatory that feels as well. It's like everything has gotten more expansive. Everything has gotten more radical. Everything has gotten more imaginational and un-slogified. And what a gift. I feel so uplifted at this point in the conversation. I started so bummed. I feel so good now.
I'm so glad. And I feel the same way. No, this is the beauty of conversations is like, oh no, we're inspiring each other. Suddenly we're connecting with each other's ideas. Gosh, if only we could do this every day. Oh wait, we can.
Sarah, thank you so much for this. I will be honest, we are recording this and like I am deep in my luteal phase. I have been having a week with some of my clients. Like I truly have to say that like this whole conversation has turned around a lot for me, like personally. And I hope that listeners feel the same way having listened to it. How can folks connect with you and your work if they want to have their own transmutations after talking to you?
Folks can find me on my website, hawthornemountaintarot.com. It's all one long word, all spelled out. And you can find my email address and you can email me, or you can sign up for my monthly tarot meditations. I pull 6 cards every month, and I primarily pull them for myself, but I end up writing a meditation. Then I send it to all of my loved ones, and you can reply to those. I love hearing from folks. month after month, reply and tell me how it landed for you, and let's start a conversation.
Beautiful. And then in addition to your wonderful tarot offerings, which I have had a reading with you, it was fantastic. Highly recommend. But you also do creativity coaching, right? Tell us, what is that aspect of your work?
Yeah, absolutely. So my creativity coaching work, I do primarily two things. I have small workshops on a seasonal basis, and then I work one-on-one with clients also on a seasonal basis. All of that information is on my website, but I have my summertime creativity workshop coming up in June. And the best way to get information about that is to get onto my creativity mailing list. And then you'll get that information straight to your inbox.
So listeners, in the show notes, you'll find links to learn more about Hawthorne Mountain Tarot, as well as join Sarah's mailing list so you can sign up for all these amazing things as they happen. Thank you so much, Sarah, for joining me today. This has been a balm and a gift, and I'm so grateful for it. And thank you, dear listeners, for tuning in. Until next time, we will see you off the grid. Thanks for listening to Off the Grid. Don't forget to grab your free Leaving Social Media toolkit at offthegrid.fun/toolkit. This podcast is a Softer Sounds production. Our music is by Melissa Caitlin Carter of Making Audio Magic, and our logo is by Natelier Studio. I'm your host, Amelia Ruby, and until next time, I'll see you off the grid and on the interweb.
Let's go off the grid. Okay. Let's go off the grid. Okay. I know that you really want to put